Money Talks. I'm Kathy Yang, your intel on the Philippine markets and the economy. In the headlines, the Philippines makes its case to the U.S. this week in Washington, D.C., negotiating on Trump's tariffs. We discuss the risks and opportunities with Peter Garnace of Unicapital Securities. Investors await first quarter GDP in the U.S. later this week. A first look at how Trump's tariffs may have dented economic growth. And Filipinos outpace global trends in integrating AI tools into workflows, says Microsoft Philippines. What has it meant for jobs? We speak with Peter Maquera, CEO of Microsoft Philippines. The U.S. Treasury Secretary denies holding discussions about China on tariffs, contradicting President Donald Trump's claim that both countries are now easing trade tensions. Trump told Time magazine last week Chinese President Xi Jinping called him to talk about the levies, but did not provide further details. Beijing denied such a call occurred, and Treasury Chief Scott Bessent demurred on Trump's suggestion in an interview with ABC News Sunday.
This was IMF World Bank Week, the NDC, as you know, and I had interaction with my Chinese counterparts, but it was more on the traditional things like financial stability, global economic early warnings. I don't know if President Trump has spoken with President Xi. I know they have a very good relationship and a lot of respect for each other.
As Bessent mentioned, Washington, D.C. hosted global finance leaders last week at the International Monetary Fund and World Bank spring meetings. Participants, however, headed home with little clarity on Trump's tariffs. Few got to meet with Bessent and other Trump officials who were simply told to be patient with the levies. No deal was finalized, despite the U.S. touting it has received 18 written trade proposals. The IMF last week forecast global growth to slow at 2.8% this year and crossed out the possibility of a recession. U.S. markets extended their winning streak last Friday for the fourth straight session as investors await a number of economic data and corporate earnings slated for release this week. The Dow rose by 0.1%, S&P 500 climbed 0.7%, and the Nasdaq gained over 1.25%. The U.S. is releasing this week its monthly jobs report and first quarter GDP report, monitoring the effects of Trump's seesawing tariff policies. Meta, Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon will also release earnings barometers of how the tech sector is faring. Taking a look at the benchmark 10-year Treasury yields, they've settled to 4.267% from the previous close, and gold prices have inched lower to $3,282.48 troy ounce. Looking at the futures markets, it looks like they're pointing to a decline when the markets start trading tonight, Manila time, with the Dow, the S&P 500, and the Nasdaq all losing about 0.4% each. Let's take a look at the Asian markets, looking higher at the get-go. Take a look at those green arrows with the ASX 200 leading the pack at 0.9% higher, Kospi Index up 0.3, and the Nikkei up 0.8%. Microsoft Philippines says new data reveal an ongoing shift towards frontier firms built around what it calls intelligence on demand. So how does this upend existing jobs and or create new work? With us now for more is Microsoft Philippines CEO Peter Maquera. Good to see you here, Peter, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate being here.
Sure. So what is the world of work going to look like? And is the new kind of work going to be created at a faster pace than it destroys it?
I think it's very exciting. I think we don't know exactly how it will end up. But I think usually when technology disruptions happen, there's a lot of new jobs that are created and some will probably disappear. But hopefully we can upskill those people and to adapt to the new jobs.
Yeah, upskill is still the operative word there, but I've found two new phrases in my readings of your latest report, and it's frontier firms and digital labor.
Yes.
What are these, and how is it going to change and pivot the whole system, if you will, of labor?
Yeah, I think the big change is before we were talking about co-pilots, where we were amplifying the skills of an individual, and we spent a lot of time talking about removing drudgery and making the person more productive. So the concept of agents now is extending that to the teams that you're a part of, so that you could literally have teams of digital workers extending the work that you do.
So I'm seeing that that extension of work goes far and beyond just workers on the employee side. It also goes up to the C-suite. So if we were to narrow the gap between what C-suite should productively do and what the workers should also correlate with in terms of what needs to be done to make the business productive, how does that narrow the gap to raise productivity?
Yeah, maybe two things. Like for myself at the leadership level, I tend to be concentrated on a lot of knowledge work, like preparing for meetings or learning about a certain product that we're covering. Whereas in the, say, in the lower levels at the working level, you might have the HR department, say the recruiting or performance reviews. So those, at that level, there might be 10 people in a particular process. So there's that productivity of the multi-step process. And then at the leadership level, there's the productivity and value-adding work at the leadership level. So I think if you combine those, you can see that you're transforming the new business model of the frontier company.
So how does it work for you, co-pilot? I mean, on any given day in the C-suite?
You know, I'm probably using it, saving me 1 to 2 hours a day. I recently was involved in this energy project. I think I would have taken 4 years to prepare for that before, and now one took me maybe a couple of weeks to do. I was explaining to somebody, oh my gosh, way back in the day when I was younger, if you can, I don't know if you'd have to ask your parents maybe, go to the library and look at the product catalog and go through all the aisles, and I'd have to read like 10, 20 books. And then I'd have to, that would take me a really long time.
It probably took away a lot more assistance in creating that work in your divisions. So presumably there were jobs lost because you used Copilot.
In Microsoft, we're very lean. We're customer zero for a lot of the things that we do. So I would generally do that on my own. So it's really just saved me incredible amounts of time.
Okay, well, what about your customers and clients? I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty, policy uncertainty in the U.S., and a lot are also on a wait and see. CapEx on hold. We don't want to spend where we don't know where it's going. How's that affecting Microsoft then?
Yeah, I think we're not immune because we're so pervasive. I think we have close to 1.8 billion customers. So what happens to everyone, of course, is we're not going to be immune from it. But what I try to tell our customers is, you know, whether it's tariffs or uncertainty, it's fundamentally about resiliency and agility so that you can adapt. So that's what I would say it's become even more important to look at how AI could help you solve problems you couldn't solve before.
So are they listening? Are they putting more money for Microsoft's products and services?
Yeah, you know, I think so. I think relatively speaking, the Microsoft platform, because we're one of the few tech firms that are actually focused on empowering individuals, right? It's not an e-commerce business. It's providing you tools to amplify your capability. So I think we're pretty resilient. Our stock price has, of course, been impacted like the rest of the world, but from a mid to long-term perspective, I think that Microsoft's mission to support everyone is a really positive force.
We have about half a minute. What are the AI jobs out there then? If anyone's listening, what should they go for and learn from?
Yeah, I think the most important ones have to do with, the ones where you're seeing the most is really leveraging work around customer service. I think BPO is a huge beneficiary potentially. So that continues to grow strongly despite the uncertainty. I think at the marketing, you see a lot of use cases. Legal, you see a lot of use cases. So the ones that involve a lot of content and going through a lot of information and being smarter really quickly would be the ones that I see the most adoption right now.
And broad adoption is where you want to be, maybe in the next year or two. But thank you so much for updating us along the way. This is the third year, in fact, because the first one, it's that fear. And right now it's about embracing or else lose the job. Thank you so much for joining us. Peter Maqueda of Microsoft Philippines. And you're watching Money Talks. Coming right up, the Bangko Sentral looks into unauthorized fund transfers in Commerce International Merchant Bankers' accounts. And a $33 million solar power plant will soon power New Clark City. Keep it here on One News. Money Talks. I'm Kathy Yang. Trade Secretary Cristina Roque and Special Assistant to the President for Investment and Economic Affairs Frederick Go is heading to the U.S. to negotiate lower reciprocal tariffs on Philippine exports. Roque said they will meet with the U.S. Trade Representative and Secretary of Commerce in Washington from April 29 to May 2. The goal is to reduce the tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump and secure rates lower than other Southeast Asian countries. Earlier this month, Trump imposed a 17% reciprocal tariff on Philippine exports, the second lowest in Southeast Asia, to address trade imbalances. Trump later declared a 90-day pause, lowering tariffs to 10% for most partners to allow time for negotiations. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas says it is working closely with Commerce International Merchant Bankers Bank to address unauthorized fund transfers that affected some of its customers. In a statement, the Malaysian bank assured clients that the issue has been resolved and all affected customers have had their funds restored. The statement comes after clients took to social media to complain about losing money from their accounts. CIMB, however, did not disclose the reason behind the unauthorized fund transfers. For its part, the Bangko Sentral says it will continue to monitor the issue until it is fully resolved. A $33 million solar power plant is set to rise in New Clark City, Tarlac. Sindicatum C Solar Power and Gurin Energy, joined by the Energy Department, Basis Conversion and Development Authority, and Union Bank of the Philippines, breaking ground on the 39-megawatt Kapaz solar power project set for completion by January 2026. The plant will power New Clark City and nearby areas. Energy Department Assistant for Renewable Energy Management Bureau, Ruby de Guzman, says the project will help the Philippines reach its target of 35% renewable energy share by 2030. It also promises to create jobs, boost the local economy, and promote sustainable growth. Mitsui & Company is interested in buying Metro Pacific Investment Corp's 20% stake in its toll unit before MPIC resumes merger talks with San Miguel Corp. Earlier, MPIC Chairman and CEO Manuel V. Pangilinan said they are selling assets to raise 30 to 50 billion pesos and cut its toll unit's debt. MIT Pacific, Mitsui's joint venture with Japan's Overseas Infrastructure Investment Corp for Transport and Urban Development, opts to exchange bonds for Metro Pacific's Tollway Corp shares. It will acquire a 6.6% stake and a board seat in the company. Meanwhile, MPTC and San Miguel have finalized its agreement on the Cavite-Batangas Expressway alignment, with construction expected soon. The S&P 500 index is often seen as a gauge of the U.S. economy. Trump's conciliatory tone with China and Fed Chief Jay Powell over the past week led the S&P 500 to jump over 4.5%. So you can see on that chart. From a technical standpoint, says Ron Acoba of Trading Edge, the S&P 500 index may build into its recent rally if it sustains its move above the pivot handle of 5,456. And this will enable the index to mark a new up leg that will put it back on track to revisit its all-time high of 6,144. The U.S. reports its first quarter GDP on April 30. Let's take a look at the markets in the first hour of trading right here in the Philippines. The Philippine Stock Exchange Index opens higher by 0.4% at 6,293. PSEI gained by over 100 points last Friday to end the session higher by nearly 2%. As for the Philippine peso, it opens today a tad weaker at 56.28 to the dollar. Peso closed last Friday slightly stronger at 56.265 against the greenback. With us now for more is Peter Luis Garnace, Equity Research Analyst at Unicapital Securities Incorporated. Good to have you back, Peter. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi Kathy, good morning. Thanks for inviting us.
All right, so the Philippine government off to the U.S. this week for trade talks with the U.S. Trade Department. How do you think the Philippines can be best positioned compared to the rest of our neighbors?
Yeah, I think the government's action to negotiate tariffs is a crucial step towards positioning the Philippines more favorably in comparison to its regional peers. However, a failure to renegotiate trade terms could harm exports, local industries, and the overall economic growth in the Philippines, given the U.S. Significance as a trading partner. So, on the other hand, with the second lowest tariff rate in the region, the Philippines could benefit from trade diversion and increased foreign investment, especially as firms look for alternatives to China and seek out competitive labor markets. And nevertheless, we think that investors need clear signs of compromise that could boost confidence. And I think the government should put everything that they can do to really boost confidence here in the Philippines. However, while setbacks in trade talks may trigger renewed sell-offs in the market and vulnerable sectors.
So
and
what does a failure look like, if I may, Peter? If, for instance, they don't get to negotiate, 17% is okay? Or is that relative to what other ASEAN neighbors will get out of their own negotiations? And how do we trade on that?
Well, I
If
think
we
for
should.
instance, yeah, I think for instance, for example, if we don't get favorable trade deals with the U.S. That could hamper growth. Let's say, for example, if we just reduce U.S. import tariffs as well, it could also undermine domestic industries here in the Philippines, which may struggle to compete with U.S. goods in terms of price and quality. So we have to really take into account also our domestic industries. We have to protect them as well from the trade deals.
Free trade agreement, do you think that's going to be the solution? A rally in the markets if that goes through?
Well, that's something that we're also looking at. that's would really boost economic growth if they are able to have that free trade agreement with the U.S.
Okay, we're also watching out for the first quarter GDP out on April 30th. That's going to be the first look-see into the impact of the tariff policies on the U.S. economy. So what are we expecting and how do we trade before and after it?
Yeah, I think in terms of the U.S. economic fundamentals, the recent protectionist policies that the U.S. implemented, I think the world's largest economy will be at risk of stagflation, and we would probably see a slower economic growth while inflation remains high. So for first quarter US GDP, I think consensus is expecting just a 0.4% growth from 2.4% in the previous quarter. And also, US is set to release its core PCE price index, which is expected to print faster growth at 3% from 2.6% previously. So it will be really interesting to see how it pans out.
Okay, just a half of a minute to go. How do we trade this week then with all that?
Well, we think that we are still cautiously optimistic as we see the market as is likely to remain volatile in the interim. Thus, we are stock pickers in this market. So we are overweight on banks as we see the sector to benefit from a slower pace of rate cuts. And our top pick is BPI as we expect the bank to sustain high ROE levels amid a strong earnings growth potential. We also like defensive names in the consumer staple sector such as Pure Gold and the telco sector like Converge, which are both driven by domestic growth in consumption and are therefore less susceptible to adverse effects of external headwinds amid escalating global trade tensions.
Got that. Thank you for setting up for the full week of this trading week. Peter Luis Garnace of Unicapital Securities. Coming up after the break, thousands line up to pay respects at the tomb of Pope Francis. Stay tuned to Money Talks on One News. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Kathy Yang. The recent Earth Day feels a little heavier as the world mourns the passing of Pope Francis, the first pontiff to put the environment at the heart of Catholic teaching. Now, two young sustainability advocates are carrying that torch. Nisha Alicer, equities analyst at DA Market Securities, and Jonas Marie Dumdum, senior consultant at the Murray Research Institute. Here's an excerpt from my exclusive chat with them.
with the release of Laudato Si, you had communities all of a sudden open themselves into the idea that they are also stewards for the environment, especially in Catholic majority Philippines, where we're always thinking about how do we improve local communities, how do we empower ourselves to take care of the things that we see around us. And the encyclical has opened the conversation for these communities to engage with the various stakeholders that they would need to talk to and see, okay, how can we improve ourselves, how are we to improve our own local communities by improving the environment. We've never had that conversation before Laudato Si, as far as I can remember. But even now, now that it was published in 2015, it's already 10 years, a lot of communities point to Laudato Si as their kind of like their North Star, if for the lack of a better term, to engage and put that religious or put faith in their belief that we have our own home to protect, and God can only do so much.
And also put it into context, because that was 2015,
Yeah.
the time that Typhoon Yolanda leveled Leyte, where you're from.
Right, yes.
And a couple of months after, COP21 had their Paris Agreement, a landmark agreement. So that must have been really big from your perspective, being an advocate.
Right, so Pope Francis came by to Leyte, visited the communities.
With
that
this
were
yellow
hard
kid,
hit.
can't
With this
forget
yellow
that.
kid, yes.
The rains just started pouring, and then the winds started blowing.
He braved
it was
it.
like
There was a
movie.
typhoon at the time. And then people braved to see him. He braved also. And it was such an important moment for everyone, I think, because the people were still trying to recover, and even years later. So it was such an impactful moment to recognize that climate change is real, it's here, and it's affecting vulnerable communities in the Philippines. We're one of the most vulnerable in the world. And so it's very important to kind of remember that call for climate action, and beginning with the church, the communities that the church can engage with could be a very powerful thing to work with, to be able to raise awareness and inspire climate action.
That's Nisha Alicet of DA Market Securities and Jonas Marie Dumdum of Nomura Research Institute, Manila branch. Catch the full interview on my show, Thought Leaders, this Thursday. The Catholic community bid farewell to Pope Francis, who was laid to rest on April 26. Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, the Dean of the College of Cardinals, presided over the funeral mass at St. Peter's Square. It was attended by world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron, and President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos. The pontiff's casket was later moved to St. Mary Maggiore Basilica, which marks the first burial outside the Vatican since 1903. Around 200 cardinals, including Luis Antonio Tagle, Orlando Quevedo, Jose Advincula, and Pablo Virgilio David, also paid their respects. His grave, marked Franciscus, now draws thousands of faithful as part of the Novendiales, the 9 days of mourning. Tragedy hits the Filipino community in Vancouver, Canada on Saturday after a 30-year-old man plowed his SUV into a crowd at the Lapu-Lapu Festival, killing 11. Apple the App was just finished performing when the car rammed through the crowd. The suspect tried to escape but was held by festival goers. Police said the man had mental health issues and ruled out terrorism as a motive. The oldest to be killed was 65 years old, while the youngest was just 5. The attack comes as Canada heads to the polls this Monday. The two leading candidates, Prime Minister Mark Carney and opposition leader Pierre Poilievre, expressed condolences to the Filipino community. In a statement yesterday, Sunday, President Marcos and his wife Liza were completely shattered by the incident. Marcos said the Philippine Consulate General in Vancouver is working with local authorities to investigate the attack. That is it for Money Talks. I'm Kathy Yang. Catch us again tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. here on One News. We're also streamed live on YouTube and on our Facebook channels. Have a great day ahead.